We will go ahead and begin our session now. Thank you all for your patience while we get situated in our audio channels. So hello and welcome to all of you again. Good morning or afternoon or evening to you, whatever it is where you are. And thank you for being with us one more time for this, our final session of the JCoR SDG Lab, which is the fifth of 5 sessions in this series, which is a contribution of the members and partners of the Justice Coalition of Religious, which is a group of 22 NGOs who represent Catholic sisters, brothers, priests, and their partners, and who are working together both at the United Nations and in different corners around the world.
I wrote
to advocate for human rights and environmental justice. And so we've come together on this, the occasion of the high-level political forum on sustainable development, which is the annual forum at which governments of the world come together to speak about their progress toward the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, each year, several of the 17 goals are selected as priority or theme. And so we have had one session for each of this year's priority goals. And we conclude today with the 5th of those priorities, which is goal number 17, partnerships or resources to support the implementation and the flourishing of those goals. And so we have the privilege today to be hearing from 4 members of our network who will be able to speak to some experience or some analysis or some work that they have done to contribute in some way to goal number 17, or how they have observed that goal number 17 is or is not being implemented in their respective countries. And so we will go first to hear from Sarah Rudolph, who is a member of the Institute of the Blessed Virgin Mary and who is based in Canada, and who will speak to us today, followed by her colleague Varka, who will also be speaking about the experience in Canada and the work that they have done to be involved in the review process that has led to Canada's presentation of their progress at this year's high-level political forum. So I now turn the floor over to Sarah to begin our conversation today.
Great, thanks, Teresa. So I will share my screen. Oh, okay, thank you. So I think everyone can see this. Yes, okay. Great. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today about SDG 17 on partnerships. This morning, I will speak to you about my experience with the Canadian Voluntary National Review preparation process. So I'll talk a little bit about our official engagement with the Government of Canada in its process, and then I'll speak at a bit more length about our civil society shadow report, and then finally give just a very brief response to Canada's VNR. So in terms of engaging with Canada's VNR process, there was not a lot of face-to-face interaction. In fact, the only sort of direct interaction I had was participating in an online info session with the Canadian government as it explained its process for participating in its voluntary national review preparation. So the government told those of us who participated in this session that its its VNR would focus primarily on SDGs 1, 4, 5, 13, and 17, which are considered to be national priorities for Canada. And then the other remaining 12 SDGs would be covered more briefly. And this is Canada's second VNR that it's producing for the SDGs. It produced its first VNR in 2018, so this is the second report 5 years later. We were also told in this info session that Canada's VNR would be submitted to the UN on June 9th. So we expected to see it, sort of mid-June at the latest, but unfortunately there were some delays, I guess. And so we did not in fact receive the VNR until last week on Tuesday, July 11th. So we haven't had a whole lot of time to review and respond to that report officially, but glad to have it in hand now. And so during this info session, we were told that NGOs, civil society, and other stakeholders could provide input to the VNR process through an online questionnaire. So there would not be any face-to-face or online consultations where we could speak, but we had to produce responses to an online questionnaire. And so we did, so that my organization, the Mary Ward Center, so it's a ministry of the Loretto Sisters in Canada, in Toronto, we provided some input into the VNR on our activities on gender equality, so SDG 5, and on prevention of human trafficking. And I was very pleased to see, very surprised and delighted to see that our input on prevention of human trafficking was included in Canada's VNR. So if you look almost at the very last page, it's page 86, there's a little blurb that describes some of our activities, especially a radio program that we have in collaboration with different partners that is broadcast in Toronto and in Latin American countries. So also participated in preparing a civil society report. So I worked with 2 other faith-based organizations to draft a shadow report, and VARCA is one of those partners. And I'll speak to our report in more detail on the next slides. And then lastly, in terms of engagement in the VNR process, I have been working with the major group and other stakeholders to provide input and to help draft our statement, which will be read on Wednesday during Canada's VNR presentation. Okay, so on to our report. So the Mary Ward Center worked very closely together with the Ministry for Justice, Peace and Creation Care of the Sisters of St. Joseph in Toronto, and with the Office for Systemic Justice for the Federation of Sisters of St. Joseph of Canada. So we worked together to create a civil society report that would really be responsive to the pandemic and the recovery experience of 2 target populations. So we looked at youth and migrant workers, but we tried to also be a bit more broad and use an intersectional and equity lenses in relation to the SDGs. And we decided to focus, well, after we had spoken to our different populations and heard from them, what came back to us was really an emphasis on SDG 1, no poverty, SDG 3, good health and well-being, SDG 4, quality education, SDG 5 on gender equality, 8, decent work, 10, reduced inequalities, and SDG 11 in terms of housing and other kinds of affordability issues. So I'm just going to speak to the youth findings in our report today. VARCA will speak to our findings and the input we received from the migrant worker population. So in terms of youth, I was the lead on soliciting youth for our report, so I'll just focus my sharing on what we heard from young people. So we reached out to a number of youth serving organizations to invite their participation in our process. And those who did participate were the FCG Refugee Center, their youth committee, the Loretto Abbey Catholic Secondary School, students from the University of Toronto and Loretto College, as well as members of the Awakening Project, which is an interfaith youth initiative. And in total, we received input from 53 youth, mostly from the Greater Toronto area, some from other parts of the province of Ontario. And these youth were between the ages of 13 and 29 years, and they reflect a diversity of backgrounds, including newcomer and refugee youth. And youth were invited to host conversation circles to discuss the intersections of economic recovery from COVID-19, decent work and employment, and their impacts on youth. And they were also given the freedom to discuss any of the other SDGs that were relevant for them or resonated with them. And these conversation circles were led by youth to create safe spaces for productive dialogue, where they could really just exchange ideas and their own perspectives. And summaries of their conversations were then incorporated into our report. So the main themes from what we heard from youth, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview of what we heard from them for each of these themes. So with respect to access to social protection, so thinking about SDG 1 and no poverty, unaffordability was a big concern for youth. They noted that social protection benefits that were offered during the pandemic, such as the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, were difficult to access for them. They were often not eligible to receive those benefits. And university youth said that international students did not have access to social protections due to their ineligibility because of their status, despite having need for them. And we also heard from newcomer youth and those with precarious immigration status that they could not access social protections either due to their immigration status. So in terms of access to education, SDG 4, high school and university youth told us that their educational experience during the pandemic has put them at a disadvantage, that the online delivery of education required adaptation to a new way of learning that put the responsibility on youth themselves to be self-motivated learners. And during the pandemic, this was very challenging. One high school group reported that the quality of our education was negatively impacted during the pandemic. We could not focus and were easily distracted while learning online. We felt bored, and we were not learning at the same level as we did in the classroom. When we returned to in-person learning, we felt that we were playing catch up. So we know that there's some deficits now in terms of education and learning for students in primary, secondary, and in post-secondary education as well, because of that year and a half or 2 years where there was a lot of variability in terms of the delivery of education. In addition, actually, the socioeconomic status of families affected the ability of high school youth to attend online learning. For example, in one family, a young person was unable to use the family's one computer to access online learning or online schooling because a parent needed that computer for remote work. So there were other impacts or other conditions that affected their access to education. And in terms of access to employment, SDG 8, youth indicated that they struggled to find secure employment during the pandemic. Those who were immigrants, international students, or had precarious immigration status found that their status was a barrier to accessing decent work. Other factors that made it difficult to access decent work included language barriers, health conditions such as being immunocompromised, and also the competitiveness of the job market. And then in terms of SDG 8 again also, but this is with respect to future employability, youth indicated being concerned about the impact of limited access to employment on their ability to find future work. They are concerned about lacking competitive skills and on-the-job learning opportunities, and consequently being unable to compete to find jobs in the future. As one high school group said, the pandemic has led to fewer job opportunities, making it a challenge for teenagers to gain valuable work experience. This lack of experience may put us at a disadvantage when competing for jobs in the future, which could have long-term implications for career prospects. And lastly, with respect to SDG 13, climate change, youth identified climate change as the most pressing SDG for governments and the international community to address, saying that it is a source of anxiety in their lives. So I'm going to move on now to the recommendations. I've given you as a broad overview of what the input we heard with respect to some of those SDGs. And this is just a sample of the recommendations that we received from the youth to address the challenges they are experiencing. So one of the recommendations that came across from a number of groups was that there was not an opportunity for youth to actually be engaged in dialogue to inform actions that the government is taking with respect to the SDGs. So one of their recommendations is to create a national platform to engage diverse groups, including youth and children and youth, in dialogue and action to achieve the SDGs. And then concerning SDG 1, they would like to see expanded eligibility for social protections for those with higher incomes and also for those who would have precarious immigration status. So other kinds of immigration status rather than just as a Canadian citizen. Third, with respect to SDG 4, we know because of these educational deficits that students experience that we need the government to work with province and territorial governments in Canada to conduct a review of the COVID-19 pandemic learning deficits, the educational experience of primary, secondary, and post-secondary students. So that's a big ask, but paying a special attention to students belonging to marginalized communities. And then as a result, to strengthen educational systems and curricula to ensure resilience in the event of future disruptions. And also with respect to education, just that with connected to unaffordability for assistance in mitigating the costs and the requirements associated with access to school, including student loans and other kinds of financial assistance. And then concerning SDG 8, providing incentives to employers to hire new graduates for full-time positions at equitable wages across industries and sectors. So making it more accessible for new graduates and young people to access jobs that have decent wages. And then lastly, to work with provincial and territorial governments in Canada to ensure equal and fair wages for work performed regardless of age, sex, race, etc. And this recommendation came from students in Ontario. There is a minimum wage of about just under $16 per hour, I believe. And there is also a student wage, which is at least about $1 less than that. And this student wage can be applied to, it is applied to a student under the age of 18 years. And they may be working in the same job as somebody who is older, doing the same kind of work, like in a retail environment, for example, but they could be paid $1 less just because of their age. So they don't see that as fair treatment. And then I just want to just give a little focus on climate change, just to reiterate how important this is for young people. They said, our generation is the future of the world, but with no safe world to live in, everyone will suffer. Making sure we handle the climate crisis or the climate change immediately will ensure that our generation and our kids will have a safe future on Earth. And we need solutions now. So lastly, I'm just going to give a few comments on Canada's VNR itself, and I'm going to just think about this from the youth lens. So overall, I would say that youth are not featured prominently in Canada's VNR. Many instances of the word youth refer to the title of a program for youth rather than the experiences of youth. So does not actually reflect the lived experiences of youth in this report. And that is likely because there were very limited opportunities for youth themselves to provide input into the VNR, except if they were to respond to that questionnaire. And again, how would they even know about this questionnaire? It was not broadly advertised and certainly not with young people. Some of the highlights from the report where youth are mentioned include programs, as I've said, that support youth. So for example, the student learning program is about young people and providing supports for education. And the Youth Employment and Skills Strategy program is another program that targets youth specifically. And the report also mentions funding available to youth, such as the Canada Student Loans Program, or projects that they could access to fund through the SDG fund. And I would say that there are a number of gaps in the VNR, particularly the areas that we've already noted in our civil society report, such as mental health, which I did not really speak to in this presentation, but mental health is disproportionately affecting young people in Canada, that they have many challenges, and we have seen that because of the pandemic that these that mental health conditions have been exacerbated. And while mental health is acknowledged in the VNR, and it says that youth are experiencing mental health conditions or challenges, but there are no specific strategies given to address this crisis in the report. And similarly, youth unemployment is acknowledged, but there are also no strategies to create decent work opportunities for youth. And I was very surprised by this, but the COVID-19 pandemic educational deficits are not acknowledged at all. Like, there's nothing about education and young people in the report, and they are certainly not addressed. And then finally, the inaccessibility of post-secondary education by many youth, especially those without status in Canada, is not acknowledged or addressed either. So there obviously remains much work to be done before we get to 2030. And at the Mary Ward Centre, we will continue to advocate and work with governments at all levels in Canada to make sure that youth are not left behind. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And we're all grateful for the opportunity to hear from the youth of Canada, especially because, exactly as you said, for the most part, their voices were not included in the report from the government, except where perhaps they were discussing programs or ways in which the state or other NGOs were seeking to serve youth, which is exactly, we often use the phrase, the principle of the UN should be nothing about us without us. And in the case of Canada's VNR, it sounds like there's a lot of mention of, so a lot about youth, but without youth. So thank you for adding that voice to the conversation and for demonstrating great partnership in your effort to bring together those voices by calling upon many different groups from different backgrounds and situations, different types of institutions with whom you are connected, and also working across congregational lines, another form of partnership by connecting with other congregations, and I think in some ways with other NGOs in the process who are not necessarily linked with a religious congregation. But some very important insights about the worries and the concerns that are weighing on young people in Canada. And of course, that's always, youth are such an important group for us to focus on because they will be most affected by any policy that is or is not implemented today in any country. And especially at the point you raised at the end with regard to environmental concerns. Surely any inaction of today will be the largest burden on today's youth and all who come after them. So really appreciate your efforts to lift up those concerns and to see, it's maybe a surprise for some to think how much jobs and employment might be a concern for people at that age. But in fact, they are something that's weighing on people from an early age as they look ahead to how they want to contribute to the world and the world that they want to live in, which is further proof that these are not voices to be ignored. There's a lot of mature thought happening even in young minds. So thank you so much for your efforts. And we will go next, staying in Canada, to get further perspective from a different population, now focusing a bit more on the perspectives of the migrant and refugee population in Canada, by going to hear from Varka Kaladzieva, who is has also been a part of the same VNR review process that Sarah mentioned. And Varka is a lay associate or member of the congregations of St. Joseph. And so she will take the opportunity to enlighten us now about a population that she knows well in Canada.
Thank you
You
so
have
much,
the floor, Varka.
Teresa. You helped me to share my presentation. Thank you for that. I will be very short in a way, because Sarah did very extensive and well framed how we partnered for our report on the SDGs for this VNR process for Canada. And I will focus specifically on the migrant worker population and why we choose to focus on the migrant worker population. We think that along with youth, migrant workers are one of the populations that are very disadvantaged in Canada, and the government is not very interested, I would say, to improve their conditions. And as Sarah said, the youth in the VNR, in the Canadian VNR report, were mentioned only a handful of times, and migrant workers were mentioned only one time in their report, in Canada's report, and it was in relation to something that was not even in Canada. So we think that migrant workers are quite disadvantaged, and this is not only been during the pandemic. This has been, all since the implementation of the migrant worker program in Canada quite a few years ago. They have been subjected to lots of abuse and exploitation. But I cannot talk about migrant workers without giving a labor acknowledgement and acknowledging the labor of the people that are sustaining our life in Canada, not only in Canada, and around the world. But before I go to the labor acknowledgement, I just want to say very quickly that Teresa already introduced me, but just in terms of the partnerships that we do in our congregation. So I am with the Sisters of St. Joseph in Toronto. We have a ministry called Ministry for Social Justice, Peace, and Creation Care. We do lots of justice work in different areas, but we are mostly focused on truth and reconciliation with Indigenous communities in Canada. Also climate justice. We have person who is specifically involved. She's a what was the name? Climate animator. So she specifically does lots of collaboration around climate justice issues, and we have much focus of our work on the migrant workers. And through partnerships, we do lots of collaboration, because we don't do frontline work. We are mostly focused on advocacy and collaboration. And one main big part of our work that is related to migrant workers is the collaborative network to end exploitation. So it's a collaboration of religious and non-religious people. Migrant Mary Ward Center is also part of the collaborative network to end exploitation. So through this network, we are doing a lot of work around migrant workers. And lately, our big project was to create experiential exercise where people play the role of migrant workers, and they are led through the some of the experiences of migrant workers in Canada, so people can learn and they can take action. So very quickly, because I'm taking a long time, Teresa, please, next slide. Very quickly, let me acknowledge the labor of people who are sustaining us in Canada and around the world. Just to say that we acknowledge the labor and the sacrifices of poor and racialized workers on the lands known as Canada. And this nation's settler colonial history includes, among others, the exploited labor of over 200 years of enslaved African and indigenous peoples, Chinese workers forced to pay a head tax to come and perform work considered too dangerous for Canadian workers, and agricultural workers and other migrant workers in danger to their employers with closed work permits. These and other violent practices allowed Canada to accumulate wealth and power, and Canada continues to profit from the historic and ongoing exploitation of poor and racialized people. And our network, we are committed to redress this legacy. So if you turn to next slide, Teresa, I want to bring forward the voices of workers because I don't want to speak for them, and just to put in a context why we really choose to focus on migrant workers in our report. So a few months ago in Canada, a group of Jamaican farm workers, they pinned an open letter to the Ministry of Labor, asking the Ministry of Labor to help them because they were mistreated in few farms in Canada. And the open letter spoke very highly and powerfully about the experiences of those workers. And when I say few farms, this is not only few farms. This is because of the workers who are concentrated in those few farms, but it is happening all over Canada. So very quickly, some of the excerpts from this letter. So they were saying, we are living in a first world country, but at both these farms, rats are eating our food. We do not have clothes dryers. So when it rains, we are forced to wear cold, wet clothing to work. We live in crowded rooms and have zero privacy. There are cameras around the houses, so it feels like we are in prison. We work for 8 months on minimum wage and can survive for 4 months back home. Employers treat us like we are not human beings. They don't care about us. We are not asking for charity. We are proud people, and we are looking for dignity, respect, and fairness. Next slide, Teresa. We are treated like mules and punished for not working fast enough. We are exposed to dangerous pesticides without proper protection. Our bosses are verbally abusive, swearing at us. They physically intimidate us, destroy our property, and threaten to send us home. When we call our liaison officers for help, they do not respond to us, or worse, they take our boss's side and put a red mark next to our name, so we are not hired back anywhere next season. This fear is what stops us and our fellow migrant farm workers from speaking up for our rights as workers and humans. So as you can see, the plight of the workers in Canada, migrant workers in Canada, is quite something. And in terms of the SDGs, migrant workers issues are cross-cut through the SDG 1, SDG 8, and others, but those are two most prominent. And in Canada, due to restrictive immigration policies and lax labor legislations across Canadian provinces, migrant workers find themselves routinely abused, mistreated, and exploited. And major reason for this exploitation is the fact that they entered Canada with so-called closed work permits. And this is a permit that ties the worker to one employer, and the worker has to work for the same employer listed on the work permit. They have to live on this address and work on the address listed on their work permit, and have the job that is listed on their work permit. So even in cases of exploitation, it is not easy leaving the exploitive employer, because the worker may find themselves breaking the conditions of their work permit and becoming non-status worker, or as is known, undocumented worker. And this is one of the reasons, and only one example, of how policies in Canada are molding the conditions for abuse and exploitation of migrant workers in our country. And when we did the report, we sent a survey to quite a few frontline workers that are frontline organizations that are supporting migrant workers, and they said that migrant workers routinely are subject to unjust working conditions and unhealthy living conditions, lack of access to proper nutrition, and difficult or impossible access to healthcare services, which all of this worsened during the pandemic. So just to point something, that during the pandemic, migrant workers were deemed essential workers in Canada, yet they were left to endure a disproportionate number of outbreaks, specifically on farms and other close proximity working spaces. And just to put in a perspective, though, in Ontario, for example, where is our province where I live in, although, so there were estimates that, for example, in general population, 250 people were infected by 100,000 cases. But then for the migrant workers, it was 5,000 cases per 100,000 people. So general population, 250 people per 250 cases per 100,000 people. For migrant workers, it was 5,000 people, 5,000 cases per 100,000 people, which is, you can see how prominent were the outbreaks, specifically on the farms. And then if I will show you, maybe Teresa, can you show the pictures? I put some pictures in my presentation here, so you can see the living conditions of the migrant workers during the pandemic and how they were trying to isolate themselves. So you can go to the pictures very quickly. There are a few pictures, so you can just have the whole, understand how they were mistreated. And this was, as I said, the COVID only made their experiences more prominent and more visible to the general population in Canada, but this has been going on forever and ever. So not only migrant workers who were previous slide, not only migrant workers who were working on the farms were mistreated, but people who filled our survey, organizations who responded to our survey, who were working with migrant care workers, they also responded with lots of abuses that were happening to migrant care workers. So because migrant care workers are working mostly in private homes, they were subjected to increased workload during the COVID-19 pandemic, and without additional pay. Employers and their children, because they were all in home, most often migrant care workers had to do additional duties of disinfection and cleaning houses. They were forced to care for sick family members and exposed to risks of contracting illness. And they were not given proper protective equipment, and also inability to isolate properly in the homes. Employers were limiting their movements. They were not allowed to leave their employer houses or take a public transportation or seek medical treatment. Quite a few migrant care workers they fell ill during COVID-19, and what they've done, they were just, by their employers, they were just unjustly terminated, which meant that they were evicted without notice from the employer residences, and they lost their housing, they lost their jobs, and they lost their income. So I want to finish very quickly, again, to give an example how during the pandemic, what were the experiences of migrant workers. And this example is in our report, and we have quite a few cases that we mention in our report, and we will be able to share the report that we did with you at some point before the HLPF is done. But so we had one worker who said that, and she's a farm worker who was working in a farm. So she said, when I had the COVID-19, there were 6 of us in the house that catch COVID at that time. And 6 days during COVID quarantine, they didn't even take us to a hotel. So they separated us, people with COVID upstairs and people with COVID without COVID downstairs, using the same entrance to come in and to come out. So when the health team from the province of Ontario call, and we explain to them what happened, and that we are using the same entrance, and some people downstairs had COVID already. And the health team sent some transportation to get all the people that doesn't have COVID to bring them to a hotel. The employers were mad about that because they said we shouldn't have told the health team nothing. They was trying to get around the health team to say, okay, you know what they called me, they called me this morning and told me that you workers, the 45 girls you're supposed to that were infected, you're supposed to come to work today. And I'm like, no, because it's the 6 days of this, it's only a 6 days of quarantine, and we were supposed to quarantine for 14 days. So we couldn't go to work. And the employer said, no, you have to come back to work. And I said, no, the health team told me I'm not going to come back to work. And the employer was very, very upset. She was very upset. She said, I don't think that I will renew your contracts next year. And I don't think I will be using more Jamaican workers because of what you have done during COVID. So this is one of the responses and how the employers were enforcing go back to work. Even people were quarantining and they were asked to come back to work. And that's why we had so many outbreaks among migrant worker population. So I will finish with that because there are other people who are going to speak. But very quickly, just to speak in maybe next slide, Teresa, to speak about the collaboration. One of our recommendations to the Canadian government is that they should abolish the closed work permits for migrant workers, and also they should provide migrant workers with access to permanent residence status, so they will not suffer for they will have more rights, and they will will not suffer the same abuse and exploitation. And for this work, we are working in collaboration with other organizations. I'm not going to talk about this because there is no time, but just to say that we collaborate a lot to bring those issues forward. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Varka, and some really amazing testimonies included in your sharing there. Amazing in the worst way, but maybe not the most surprising for anyone who has ever had interaction or the experience of migrant work. These are common phenomena that we see in so many different countries and contexts. And I think the statistic you shared about the difference in COVID rates for the population of migrant workers versus the whole of Canada, being basically a comparison of 250 for the general population to 5,000 for migrant workers. And those photographs say a lot about what a nation declares or decides is acceptable treatment of a group of human beings. And, I keep thinking about the labels of essential workers, but clearly, essential in name, essential when we recognize the need for the work they're doing, but then in terms of the way that they are compensated or housed or responded to in situations of abuse or exploitation, definitely the label that's actually being used is not essential, but expendable. That is very clearly the system as you have illustrated it for us. So thank you for sharing that deep insight into the lived experiences of migrant workers in Canada. And thank you for all of the work of the collaborative network to end exploitation. Again, clearly a very worthy collaboration and partnership in order to bring together stories. I'm sure while it fits into a few slides, I'm sure it was huge effort calling on people who from many different communities, from many different institutions, to bring together those powerful stories and to make the message so clear. So thank you for your efforts to collaborate and bring all of those stories together. And we will go next to another corner of the world and to another congregation to hear from Sister Giovanna Muha, who is currently in leadership for her congregation, the Congregation of Jesus, where she's serving in Rome, Italy. But she is from Romania, and that is one of the countries that will be presenting or has presented this year's high-level political forum. And so she will be speaking to her experience and observations of Romania for us today. So Sister Giovanna, you have the floor.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank you for this huge opportunity to speak to you today. I would ask you pardon for my bad accent English. So I'm from Romania, as Teresa said, I'm from Romania. Actually, I am now in, indeed, Italy, but I'm in Vicenza, and it is a huge privilege to be here, for which I'm extremely grateful to my sisters, Janet and Cynthia, for their invitation, being aware of huge responsibility and constancy for all that it's mean. Now I will share my, I try to share my, yes, I'm here. Okay. Can you see my screen? No.
We do see it, but to make it larger, yes, exactly.
Okay. Before I start my presentation, let me say a few words about my religious identity, and let me explain, because the reason why we are here, the achievement of some of SDGs were the reason of struggle and suffering. So, of suffering for my founders 400 years ago. So I'm a proud member of Congregation of Jesus, whose founder is Venerable Mary Ward, an English woman of aristocratic origin, a contemporary of Shakespeare, who lived during the Great Persecution against the Catholic Church in England. Through all that, this great figure of faith and shining beacon of her time was, and all that she achieved through her work was completely destroyed at the end of her life, and her name banned. Mary Ward became the pioneer of apostolic life for women, a legacy enjoyed today by all apostolic women's congregation. Mary Ward's vision and action anticipate not only what the Second Vatican Council will proclaim for centuries later, especially with regard to the role and place of lay people and of women, but also what brings us together here today, as I have already stated. Regarding to the recognition of Mary Ward's influence and merits, but also of the legacy of her ideas, Pope Paul VI was one who later stated, "It is obvious that women are destined to be part of the living and operative structure of Christianity in such a relevant way that the full virtues of this participation have not yet been discovered." Or, as the life and her figure was synthesized many centuries later by the very descendants of those who made her suffer most, considering her a poisonous weed that must be pulled from the church field. Pope Pius XII called her that incomparable woman given to the church in one of the darkest, most blood-stained periods of history. Or a Jesuit father assumed, known of Shakespeare's imaginary heroines, surpasses in beauty and charm, in serenity and wisdom, in courage and fidelity, in irreproachable femininity, this heroine created by God. As far as voluntary national Romanian report is concerned, I would like first of all like to present my sincere congratulations for the robustness, honesty, and transparency with which it has been drafted, without losing sight of certain aspects such as the lack of collaboration, cooperation, and involvement of young people, which they have already pointed out in the declaration they submit. And here I would like to add not only the children voice, the civil society voice were not here, because the only who drafted it was the government. And another comments to Romanians VNR, gaps, mental health, COVID pandemic, education deficit, the accessibility for all for the education. So I go, yes, now about the Romanian VNR, we see here, this is the goal, Romanian's goal, and the Romanian object, and then I will present of the point. Here it is a general view. The 6 points are covered under each goal out of 16 goals of Agenda 2030. This starting with a general overview, followed by the policies and measures, response to the war in Ukraine, leave no one behind, next steps, local community support, and civil society action. So Romania's objective in the field of international cooperation for development and humanitarian assistance are based on international commitments such as eradication of extreme poverty, promotion of security, sustainable economic, social, and environmental protection development. Romania became a donor state of official development assistance in 2007 with the occasion to the EU. And here you can see some aspects. Okay. I would like to go further about to see policies and measures that Romanian. So the law on international cooperation for development and humanitarian assistance regulates the action funded from Romanian state's budget, the programming and institutional framework, as well as the funding and implementation framework. In April 2018, Romania acquired the status of participant OECD Development Assistance Committee. It represents the main international forum of donors of international cooperation for development, being also the body that sets the standards in the matter. Thus, Romania's contribution to the fulfillment of global objective related to official development assistance is validated annually by the DAC. So, what's happened?
Giovanna, we weren't seeing your whole screen, so I'm sharing
I don't know
it from
what's
mine.
happened.
I'm sharing your screen from my side now.
Okay, thank you so
we can
much.
see it. Mhm.
But maybe when somebody writes something that's it's changed. Okay, then here we see the response to the war in Ukraine, and you can watch the granting quota supplying more than 80% of the needed electricity, development of cross-border electricity transmission in the connection between the two states. And then in Romania, in 2022, Romania granted the Republic of Moldavia 2 aids in the form of direct budget support in total amount, as you can see here, 10,045 millions. Yes, if you can go further about, thank you, leave no one behind. Thank you. Romania supported the least developed countries, granting ODA amounting, if you can see the numbers, 5 and not 3 million from 2016 to 2022. At the end of 2022, EMFI and Row 8 organized the 13th edition of Post-Conflict Stabilization and Reconstruction course at Dakar in Senegal. Through it, Romania has showcased its expertise and lessons learned from the many peacekeeping and post-conflict stabilization operations it has participated in over the past 2 decades. Yes, I would like to, and you can see here what was done in what it's about the challenges. The main challenges for ODA policy is represented by the many neighboring and world crises. It is necessary to increase adaptability and flexibility of Romania's action as an ODA donor, especially with the crises that will continue to unfold in the coming years, including those generated by the war in Ukraine. The commitment to increase the volume of ODA may be affected by future pressures on the state budget, which shall also affect Romania's citizens. Yes, we can see here the competitiveness of Romanian products on external market may be improved by increasing the export of high-tech goods as a measure of efficiency and integration of Romanian companies into the international value chains. And you can see below the international partnership and what was granted of the part of Romania. And now I would please, if you can go the next slide. This is my CG sisters in Romania. Allow me to present a few points concerning my provincial's contribution and type of partnership with various entities in order to achieve the 2030 agenda. And here I would like to refer particularly to the educational, social, and anti-trafficking spheres. Next, please. Thank you. We are all aware that in the face of huge challenges, only together can we make a difference. The Romania province, which has been present here since 1852 for almost 171 years, has been active mainly in the field of education, to which medical, spiritual, pastoral, and social field have been aided along the way. Present in almost all Catholic dioceses, where the Catholic presence barely reaches 5% of the total population of Romania, the CG sisters strove especially after the fall of communists to raise the moral, intellectual, and spiritual level of all those who passed through our kindergarten school or where they had a chance to activate as teachers. At the beginning of the 19th, some Romanian sisters, they played a special role in collaboration with the Jesuits in the integration of Roma children, a particularly challenging field of activity. Thanks to various NGOs, we have managed since 2009 to be active in the sphere of human trafficking, where Romania, unfortunately, is considered in Europe as the first source of human material delivered to modern slavery, as it was called. We thank God that in collaboration with the Church, many NGOs, helped by many benefactors, collaborators, managed to save a lot of human destinies, opening Sorbonne Romania in Bucharest. Thanks to the zeal of our sisters, especially from the Mary Ward Social Center in Rădăuți, from the St. Joseph Placement Center in Iași. Next slide, please. or the St. Family Social Center from Bucharest, many children and young people, but especially young women from poor families, were helped to finish school well, receiving moral, intellectual, sanitary, and financial support, and to have a very good start in life. During the 2 years of COVID, our sisters, in collaboration with many congregations in the country, with the priests of our diocese, with various NGOs, with many benefactors, have been the spiritual, human, medical, sanitary side of many affected in the hours of trial for the most poor among the poor in Romania. The old people left alone, children whose parents went abroad and could not return. Regarding the work with refugees, especially after the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, we enjoyed a good partnership and collaboration with JCoR Romania, Jesuits Refugee Service Pedro Arupe, coordinated by Jesuit fathers, or with Caritas Center in Bucharest. Our institute in Bucharest was for several months, starting at the end of February 2022, the host of a group of Ukrainian women and children who fled from Odessa or from Kiev, from the horror of the war. And because my mother is Ukrainian and I can speak Ukrainian, I could help the children, the women with translation and different societies or different organizations to find a school, to find a kindergarten, to find a place where these women who are intellectual and well rich, but they have to leave everything to assure a future, to assure that their children can have a secure life. We are aware that our contribution is but a drop of a tear, whipped away in the ocean of suffering in the world, but we thank God for the chance to serve Him in His suffering brothers and sisters. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for all your patience and attention. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sister Giovanna. And it was beautiful to see all those images of how many are contributing and in so many ways. I think your, well, I appreciate, first of all, your critique of Romania's VNR and the comparisons between your experience there and the experience of your sisters from the way that the country is presented in the report. And I really admire the contribution that you're making. I think your congregation, you mentioned, is providing many different kinds of support, social, psychological, medical, spiritual, financial. And when we talk about resources and partnerships to support sustainable development, I think what you've illustrated is maybe one of the most irreplaceable contributions that we see coming from religious congregations and faith communities in general, is this kind of localized support that responds on an emergency basis and has this established trust at the community level wherever needs arise, and especially where the needs are immediate, that congregations are there and present in the community. They're trusted to provide those kinds of support and service where they are needed. And this is something that I think it would be very difficult for government, especially where they're maybe beginning new programs, even where they want to respond to those needs. There's a very important role for congregations like yours and your partners to play in helping to connect the government resources and government programs to the community, to establish trust, to establish clearer pathways for people to access the services that they deserve and that they need. And so it's your presence at that community level, I think, is really essential, and illustrates the essential importance of the participation of religious in this larger effort that we call sustainable development, and that we hope governments will also recognize that role, and not seek to overtake or for you to be subsumed by the responsibility of government to respond to the needs of the people, but to recognize your existing relationships with communities and to work with you to reach and meet the needs of those communities. So thank you for highlighting that excellent work, and for delving into all those technical aspects of finances, which many are afraid to get into all of those numbers. So thank you for highlighting that important, extremely important aspect of the Sustainable Development Agenda as well. Excellent work, Sister Giovanna.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And finally, we will hear today from Sister Winifred Doherty, who is a member of the Congregation of Our Lady of Charity of the Good Shepherd. And she represents her congregation through their NGO at the United Nations in New York. She is originally from Ireland, but in her capacity from her seat at the UN office, she will be speaking to us today about the perspectives and experience of her congregation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So, Sister Winifred, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Teresa. And thank you to those who've gone ahead of me. It's so powerful to hear each one's experience and the unity and the diversity of response. So thank you. I will share a screen, and as Teresa said, I will speak to you in terms of what I know of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, let me say, first off, I have never been to the Democratic Republic of Congo, but I have been engaged at many levels in terms of our mission there. And so we're going to look at partnerships. That's the focus that I took for this presentation, partnerships. And what are we talking about when we talk about partnerships? And so I put some images there trying to represent partnerships. And then I put here a lot of images looking at partnership within the congregation of Our Lady of Charity of the Good Shepherd. And we're in 71 countries throughout the world. What's dotted is our presence, if I can say, in the developing world. That's what's focused on here, but we also have a presence in the developed world, in America and Europe and Australia. And so our work, here am I at the Advocacy Office. Much of this work in the Global South is pioneered and brought forward by the Good Shepherd International Foundation. So I'm talking about partnerships. And of course, here this morning, we're talking about our link with the JCoR, the Justice Coalition of Religious. So partnerships are everywhere and they're complex. And we're talking about the UN and its goal 17, partnership for the goals. And so I'm saying, and I think it has been demonstrated this morning, it begins among ourselves, across congregations, in collaboration with the people who experience the injustices, in collaboration with government, in collaboration with church. And so in the Democratic Republic of Congo, we are in a place called Kuwezi. And in more recent years, we have moved out to these other venues, and we are talking about the whole issue of child labor and how children and their parents are exploited by the mining situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And in the initial work that was done, and let me say, for 2 years, the sisters walked among the people without any project, without any car, without any resources. And so they were known as the Walking Sisters. And so what they heard is the desire from parents and their children, we want to be educated. So SDG 4, and so I'm saying we have moved from the top photograph to the bottom photograph. So it's not just focusing on education, it's a community development program to address human rights abuses. This program began in 2013, and we are known as Bon Pasteur Kuwezi, and with local development partners, affiliate with the Good Shepherd Sisters. And so they started the program to assist women, girls, and children from artisanal mining communities in isolated and impoverished and underserved cobalt mining areas around the city of Kuwezi. And over the years, the program has developed a very holistic model of intervention, integrating education and alternative livelihoods and social protection, and has been able to reach more than 20,000 people in 8 artisanal mining communities. So that's something of the breadth of the project. And so, again, I have situated the DRC in the African context, close to Angola and close to Kenya. And it's the sisters from Kenya initiated this project and were the Walking Sisters in the beginning days. But I want to highlight that the most important partners are the local communities themselves. And I think we heard that from Giovanni when she was talking about the local people. They're our richest resource. The children, the women, the families, the local community. And then it extends to local government. Yes, we have good relations with local government, not so much the national government and the mining companies. Now, that's a whole other issue, how develop relationships and partnerships with them. And so, just to broadly look at what's in SDG 17. It's divided in a number of sections, unlike the other goals. And so you have a focus on finance, on technology, on capacity building, on trade, and then on systemic issues, looking at policy and institutional coherence. And here is where I'm going to dwell, particularly 17.16 to 17.17, looking at multi-stakeholder partnerships, which talk about encourage and promote effective public-private and civil society partnerships, building on the experience and resourcing strategies for partnership. And then there's a section just to complete the targets on data monitoring and accountability. And so in the midst of the Sustainable Development Goals, our big goal is SDG 5. But you can't look at SDG 5, as we heard this morning, unless you look at SDG 1, no poverty, no hunger, good health, good education, and decent work. And so among all the targets for the Democratic Republic of Congo, we have focused on 8.7. By 2025, end child labor in all its forms. We were so hopeful in 2015 that we thought this project of ending child labor, not me, Winifred, and not the Good Shepherds, but we, the global community, thought it was possible to end child labor by 2025, 5 years ahead of the completion of the goals. That's how optimistic we were. Of course, what we hear today from the different monitoring and reporting is we are not on track. And so what does the Democratic Republic of Congo say in their VNR about child labor? At least they mention it generally and specifically. So we'll just look very quickly at generally. So they look at poverty. They look at schools. And they do say that more than 1,200 schools are being built, and the budget for education exceeded 22% of the total budget in 2022. They talk about universal health coverage. Reform will need to increase access to health services for all Congolese. Free education instituted in 2020 has helped to rehabilitate more than 1 million children. And then they're talking about the challenges. The scale of the challenges ahead will require radical change and ambitious and appropriate policies. Well, of course, they're all the right words. And as I read that, then I say, why aren't we taking the actions to implement and address these challenges? We must create better jobs and promote a more inclusive and just economy. We must take steps to strengthen social protection systems, improve public services, and invest in clean energy. We must address the root causes of inequality, environmental degradation, and climate change. And all that is written on page 5. And it's all very laudable and it's aspirational. But it's not, while naming the challenges, it's not doing anything to address the challenges. And so just being more specific with regard to the mention of child labor, they do mention about their relationship, the Ministry of Employment and Labor with ILO, and that they have launched the recruitment of 2,300 new labor inspectors and supervisors, as well as administrative staff. Now, that's interesting. I'm not able to say whether that has happened, whether it's effective or not. And the government has adopted communication and advocacy strategies for the elimination of child labor in mines through the Interministerial Commission for Monitoring and Remediation of Child Labor in Mines. Now, that also is interesting, and that's the level of specificity that we hear. The government has set up and validated a child labouring monitoring and remediation centre for monitoring data on the number of children involved in mining with the assistance of ILO. So this is the specificity that they give, and that is taken from page 77 of the report. And I say that, and I say, I don't know how that's working. I do know that we collaborate with local government in Kuwaiti, but what is the link with the national government, and is the work that we do at the local level, is that counted in the statistics? Are the labour officers knowing about this project? I don't know. I'm not able to verify at this point any of this. So what partnerships to engage to bring about change? So I'm moving from what the government said to look at what are the partnerships that the congregation of Our Lady of Charity of the Good Shepherd have entered into to bring about a huge significant change in the areas where we're working in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And so I'm saying, you know, we've gone from the mines and SDG 8, we're talking about decent work and economic growth. We looked at the whole issue of, you know, from the mines to the education of children. And we can go from the mines to, we have a model where we farm and sell agricultural products as an alternative to working in the mines. And this really addresses the whole issue of no hunger, while also eradicating poverty. And in the last 2 years, we were able to bring in a mobile clinic to the area to service people who may be experiencing illness, etc., etc. So this is all about addressing good health. And at the heart of all that is SDG 5, focusing on girls, women, and children, and reaching out, of course, to the broader community. So this is something of what the change looks like in practice. And so just very briefly to say that mining and mines are at the very center of economic activity in the DRC. And yet all the rich resources are exported out of the country and the people continue to remain poor. And all of that has to do with exploitative labor. We've heard already about it in terms of migrants working in Canada. But these people are migrants who think that maybe I can earn a bit of money by moving to this mining area. And it's not the big mines that they're in, it's the smaller mines where they talk about artisanal mining. And so there's very little health and safety, and it's a whole exploitative chain, all with servicing the world with the cobalt that is necessary for making our batteries for our phones, our electrical vehicles, our laptops, etc., etc. So we are the beneficiaries of what people in the Democratic Republic of Congo do in this artisanal mining. So I want to make that connection. And yet and I'm saying this for years, cannot live without all of the electronics. And so this just gives you some list of all of the mining companies that are in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I just want to say that we have engagement here with this one, Glencore. This is the one that we have been engaging with. And you can read more in the PowerPoint links if you wish to follow up on this later. But just to say that like an estimated 200,000 people in the Democratic Republic of Congo are engaged in artisanal and small-scale mining. And as I said, largely unregulated, no health and safety, and exploitative in its very nature. So partnerships are about connecting dots. And for me, the dots I'm trying to connect is from good practice, and then using influence, investment, and advocacy to bring about change. It's about knowing the root causes while addressing the symptoms. So I think we're always give and take between addressing the symptoms, addressing the very real issues of people who are suffering and suffering in most horrible ways, addressing them, and yet saying, what is the root cause? Why is this happening? And so in the Democratic Republic of Congo, we're saying it's happening because it's situated in the mining extractive industry for cobalt, which is in great demand in the rest of the world and is just an exploitative moment in our history and in our engagement with regard to resources. So Good Shepherds, through multiple partnerships at all levels, using all sorts of tools. So partnership is in no way linear. It's not going from A to B to C in any kind of progression. It's a case of multiple partnerships across multiple levels, using all sorts of tools. So some of the tools I'm identifying here are media, advocacy, statements, shareholder proposals, and of course, some are sought out. For example, donors. None of this could happen without the partnership of our donors. Some are big, some are small, but everybody counts in that partnership. Everybody makes the project work. And then some were invited to, for example, the BBC Panorama program a few years ago, where they looked at the whole issue of mining cobalt right to the shareholders' floor of Tesla, which is one of the big car manufacturing companies that uses the cobalt from the DRC. And in all of this, good practice is recognized. And when good practice is recognized, it seems to attract awards. But we ourselves began with a documentary way back in 2013 on Maisha, maybe a bit before, A New Life Outside the Mines. And again, you can look at this. This was part of the creating awareness. And as I said, then we moved to being recognized and being awarded for what was being done. And so in 2019, Catherine received $1 million from the Opus Prize for the Kuwaiti program. And of course, this was a big boost to the project and allowed the project to expand. There were other awards coming from the Thomas Reuther Foundation, and from this award, I'm never good at difficult words or words that I'm not familiar with, but this came from the Gaia Larcia Award by the African Child Policy Forum for its outstanding contribution to the elimination of child labour in Africa and the adoption of a good practice model that can be replicated. And I read that little piece out to you, a good practice model that can be replicated. And so, like, we seek to roll it out in other areas. again, Jane, a new director of the program, she received a reward, Hero for Charity, from Austria. So these are all moments, as I say, of recognition. The use of the media. Usually the good practice attracts the media. So ABC News and CBS News, they have been reporting on both what's happening at the national level and mining, but linking it with the services that we provide as an alternative good practice. And so another step in this was it's here in New York, the Investor Advocates for Social Justice. And sometimes our congregations, we don't realize that we're partnering. And so something that happened during the BBC production was that it was discovered that, yes, through New York Province and through Investor Advocates for Social Justice, we actually had shares in Tesla. And so this link, I mean, did I know about it? Not at all. Did DRC know about it? No. So sometimes we work and we're all about the same thing, but we don't know that what each other is doing to support the other. So I just found that fascinating. This group have been very dedicated to looking at companies and company and policy and seeking to bring resolutions to the floor of shareholders. And I have been involved in this for 3 years, nearly 4. And through our resolutions, just this year, we have been invited by Tesla to take part in conversations at the table. They don't want this resolution coming up saying every year, look, we need an audit of child labor in your supply chain. They don't like that coming up every year. So the persistence of saying it has caused them to rethink and say, okay, we'd like to invite you to the table to see what we can do. So this has just happened. I see this as very positive. You can again look at the shareholders meeting. If you want to look at it, the BBC program is there also. There are more resources if you're interested in following. The more recent shareholder meeting is here. And the work of the Good Shepherd Foundation in advocacy. So it's not just the New York NGO office that has been involved. The Good Shepherd International Foundation has equally been involved in advocacy on behalf of the DRC. And so they took part largely in meetings in Geneva with regard to the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. And so in December 22 was the 11th annual forum. They engaged in 2021 in terms of the year to end child labor. Academia has been involved throughout Columbia University in researching the project, in looking at its growth and development, etc. And human rights in their reporting in terms of human rights abuses in the DRC, they also have been very helpful in highlighting the issue. And so they have collaborated with us in different events and panels. And so the Good Shepherd International Foundation, there have been members of the Global Battery Alliance. So again, trying to get at some ethical perspectives around the production of batteries. Alliance 8.7, well, this is more the Good Shepherd office here in New York, the advocacy office with Alliance 8.7, and in terms of the International Labour Organization, in terms of pathfinder countries to eliminate child labor. And so to conclude, There's hopeful signs from the government, as I see it, as outlined in the VNR. Bon Pasteur Kowesi has made a difference where they are engaged. And the challenge is to build stronger relationships. How engage national level government to uphold children's rights and labour rights? And will the appointment of inspectors make a difference? And as I mentioned, following the issuance of 3 shareholder resolutions, Tesla have now invited us to the table. How encounter the exploitative role of mining industries in the DRC? And I think we heard that this morning in terms of how encounter it in terms of migrants, how encounter it in terms of anybody who is oppressed, who is suffering. And of course, how counter corruption. I'm not sure that we have moved to how to address that, how call out the government. And when we live in an environment that can be very shaky, if I can put it that way, with regard to partnerships and NGO government collaboration, depending on where you are in the world, sometimes this last one, how counter corruption is difficult. So I think that's all I want to share with you this morning in terms of partnerships, to show you something of the breadth and width of partnerships, the complexity of partnerships, and yet the difference that partnerships can make. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Winifred. As always, a very enlightening and thoughtfully crafted presentation. And it's clear that while you haven't been to the country yourself, you have certainly been in communication. And maybe that in itself is an illustration of the value of partnership. And you mentioned that the efforts of your congregation there in DRC began really as many different kinds of partnership working together. First with sisters coming from Kenya and Angola, and collaborating with those in DRC, as well as partnership between your congregation and other development-related NGOs, partnership between the NGOs and the local population, who of course are the most expert in the situation and possible solutions, and also developing relationships with local governments, hopefully as a gateway or pathway to eventually being able to have stronger conversation and partnership with national level government. And I especially appreciate your description of partnerships in a phrase is about connecting dots. And I think, you know, I appreciate that you mentioned many different kinds of ministry as part of this partnership to end child labor, because it's through the sharing of information and data from different settings, like a medical clinic and a school, as well as people who are working to liaise with the labor department or ministry, that we are able to really put together the larger picture, to have all the data in front of us to say, this is how child labor is showing up or appearing in an education setting where we are losing children from school, or they are experiencing serious deficits because of lots of time out of school, or perhaps how it's showing up in a medical setting where we're seeing long-term health effects in small children who have been exposed to different materials and elements in the context of mining labor that are having deleterious effects on their health that we should not be seeing in children. So it's this kind of, I'll say, multifaceted or multi-dimensional approach to any issue that allows us to make a stronger case for action on the part of government and to help us understand as well the possible solutions. And as a third element to that, not only education and medical settings are involved in this issue, but the point about providing opportunities for agricultural work as an alternative to working in mining, because of course, it's not enough to have inspectors who are trying to monitor and maybe close down some operations, but there needs to be work to go to. There needs to be an alternative way of making a living. And if we can also have a living that addresses the immediate needs of the population, instead of one like mining that's really just serving the well-being and perhaps the excesses of those who are in foreign countries and not at all serving the local community. I mean, these are all important pieces of a very complex puzzle. And the final piece that I thought was really vital was this idea that we are sometimes engaged in financial partnership with mining companies without realizing it. And that's something for any large group, like a congregation that may have assets invested in different types of stocks or banks, for us all to be monitoring how we may actually be financially contributing to some of the human rights abuses committed by different types of corporations, including mining or other extractive companies, and how we can either respond to that by seeking to remove our investments, or by, as your congregation has done, becoming an active voice for change within those companies to motivate them to pay more close attention to the effects of their the practices in their supply chains. So many different types of partnership woven throughout your presentation. And I thank you for all the ways that your congregation is expressing that value on partnerships. And I hope we'll be able to share your slides with everyone afterward, because I know you had a lot of great links on there to other resources that I'm sure people will want to access going forward. So if we can just stay together another few minutes, I'd like to give an opportunity for anyone who might like to offer a response or a question of those who are gathered here, which you can do by raising your hand with your camera on, or by using the raise hand button under the reactions button. And I will begin first by going to Father Gabriel Naranjo in Colombia. Please, Father Gabriel.
Sí, saludos cordiales desde Colombia.
Greetings from Colombia. I wanted to speak just to reaffirm what you just mentioned. I am very happy about the experience I had in these 5 sessions of the JCoR Labs, and I am very thankful to JCoR. And I believe this intense work has been very fruitful. It is a seed that will bear fruit, I'm sure. And I've been moved to give a further impulse to JCoR in my continent, and move to the action, go to the field and start doing things, because the theory is very important. Planning is very important, and we need to give an answer to different sensibilities and different challenges, but we need to make it a reality. And at the same time, I feel overwhelmed by the news that I got today from Canada, the suffering of the migrant workers there. And at the same time, I feel that despite being a gap between the achievements and the ODS, the SDGs, I recognize that there is a change, that we are walking, that we are moving forward. And I would like to thank specifically your comments, Teresa, because you were summing up every intervention and you helped us understand better what was the main topic of the interventions and the reports. And of course, I would like to thank the very important and faithful role of Anna and the rest of the interpreters, because they were able to convey very well what was being explained. It's been a great help, and I'm very, very thankful for them. And I hope that the experience that we have in these SDG labs continue in next years, because it's been very practical and informative. Thank you very much.
And thank you also for your participation throughout, Father Gabriel. Appreciate your presence and your careful listening ears as always. Are there any others that would like to offer a comment or question while we are together today? Yes, please, Gail.
Good morning, everyone. I think that saying thank you is not enough, but I recommit myself and the people around me, my community, to working with JCoR, because this is what we are all about. When we get to hear the stories of others in other places, we tend to look at ourselves and what we are doing, that is to change. This is where conversion comes about. And Maria Spez, I thank her for being with us as Mother of Hope for All Nations, as we move forward now into a new era of, how should I say, cooperation, collaboration, commitment, all the C's. You see, the C is greater than all of us. And together we are church, that big C. So that, Teresa, when we started this community, I don't think we saw this blossoming, because we were really sort of shy and the communities were not as many. It was just a few of us. Huh? I thank you that you kept me here, because I was running and I feel as if I'm still running. But this, I think today has grounded me a little bit. So I thank Sister Winifred, that insight, that somehow she has given us a resource that we need as Christians, as Catholics, as a community. And we need to work on that. We really need to work on our commitment to community as a church, not just as a social group or a club. We have too many clubs in our church that promoting the wrong ideals of church. And it's a challenge in the Caribbean for us to be church, yet not church, because we have many politicians who are plain religious leaders, and they have the means and the wherewithal more than us. But the congregations are becoming more sensitive to the idea of our religious movement. I have done a lot of work behind the scenes. I don't like in front, but I think I need to take my step forward now and take charge within my community, within my country, because at the OAS, I have a big responsibility that I need to, I really need to use that time and that area and that space, as Sister Dorothy said, to really bring about that conversion at that level. So I thank you for today. I thank God for this opportunity, because to be alive and to see this and to hear this is a wonderful thing. I look forward to the Antilles workshop. Again, I said it, because we are looking forward to it. When I say we, I've already done the media, so that as we reach out, if anyone wants to get my information or my assistance, I'm prepared to give it. In the open now, I'm not hiding anymore. You all have brought me from under a rock by force. I had to say by force. So thank you, thank you, thank you. God bless.
Thank you, Gail, and for your constant presence with us as well. You help to make us community by remaining with us in a reliable way. We'll go, we have 2 more requests to speak, so those will be the last 2 for today. We'll go first to Sister Ernestine and then to Sister Lucy Kima.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Teresa. I just wanted to thank you for the organization, for having organized this platform with a lot of people from different places, reunited, were with each other for 5 days. It is really a space of sharing, of trust, of freedom. And I can also say it's a place of co-learning. It is really encouraging for me, and I think for everybody, to listen to others' experiences and to the realities in different places in the world, to weaknesses and strengths and challenges that each one of us face in their own context. And I also wish that this gives us the courage to move forward and to face challenges that we know very well, the common problems, the common challenges of the world today, whenever we talk about whether climate change and everything happening in our own context and our work. So thank you everybody for your contributions to enrich one another, and this gives us a new push to continue our mission where we are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sister Ernestine. And now for our final comment to Sister Lucy Kima.
Merci beaucoup, Thérèse.
Thank you so much, Teresa. I'm very happy, very blessed to be and to participate to these sessions. Thank you for the exchange that offers challenges and sometimes deceiving. No, so thank you for all the sharing from all around the world, for the Canada, when they talk about child labor, the foreign students that are not well treated. All of this really hurt me a lot, and thank God we have a platform to help us find solutions and resolutions with regard to the children who work in the mining industry, because it's the reality of our country. I would like to ask the sister question is, can the congregation say something? So is there a decrease in the number or not? What can we do to help the children? So what do you do? So the children leave the work and the mines and go to school, and is there a real change in what you do? So are you causing real change in what you do? Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Lucy. And I think there's maybe a question there for you, Winifred, if you are able to respond, or maybe you will just direct us to a good place to find an answer about the impact of your congregation's work with regard to mining and child labor.
Thank you, Teresa, and thank you, Lucy. Yes, without a doubt, there is real change. Real change for children who, because of education, leave the mines because it's provided free and because there is a meal together with that. And the children, it's not a regular school. The children are, what I say, in catch-up mode to get them to whatever level so that they can enter the public schools. There are not many schools in our area, so that has also been a difficulty. But so, yes, change. Number two, when COVID started, children started going back to the mines. So we've had that struggle. The whole emphasis on alternative livelihoods with agriculture, that has made a huge impact in the whole community in terms of health and nutrition and a dignified way of engaging one's labor and being remunerated accordingly. And from that, sometimes there is overproduce. So there was a logistics being arranged between, it also had to do, the same program was happening somewhat in Angola, where there's much more agriculture, with trying to bring overproduction and surplus to markets where we would supply women who were on the fringes of markets so that they could earn a better livelihood and secure produce. So that was another part of it. So yes, all of these things do make a difference. There is no doubt about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Winifred. And to learn more about the specific data on the impact, I know we can find great resources on that page of her congregation's website that's related and dedicated to this work in Kolwezi and the surrounding communities. So we will look there for further information as well. So with that, I know we are over our scheduled time, but I want to just quickly thank everyone once again for all of your participation today and throughout this series of sessions that is the JCoR SDG Lab. This effort itself is definitely a demonstration and a labor of partnership, which makes it fitting that we conclude with this goal today. And I thank you all for your presence, for your contributions, your careful study of your respective countries' reports to this forum, some of them hundreds of pages long, and most importantly for your on-the-ground contributions, building relationships and learning from those communities whose voices are too rarely included in national reports, and whose voices are vital if we are to move beyond the status quo of inequality and injustice, and if we are to realize the beautiful world that is envisioned by this agenda of the United Nations, and of course by our own faith, by our congregation's charisms and constitutions. So thank you for your contributions. Please continue to build community and partnership with us through JCoR. We have a detailed guide to the entire forum, which I have shared in the chat box. So, and that's available again in all 4 languages that we are using during this session today. So if you want to learn more about how to engage in this forum, you can find a lot of information there. And while you're on the website, I hope you will also look to learn more about JCoR itself, as we hope to bring you and your experiences into many other aspects of our advocacy in the United Nations system as well. And finally, one big thanks again to our team of interpreters, Anna, Pascal, and Dahlia, as well as Vivian, who was with us one day during this series, for making all of this possible on a global scale. You are fabulous, and we thank you for sharing your gifts with us. And with that, we will conclude, and I wish everyone an excellent experience for the rest of the forum.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Thank you so much, our interpreter. Thank you, and all of us.
Thank you to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias.